on this call, because this really shows that you're all thought leaders in the space who's actually thinking about something which is going to be implemented over the course of next 7 years, right? So we are looking at not a short-term, medium-term project, but we are looking at a long-term project, and how that will impact what your current jobs, your current company's positions, and what the growth of your companies and the technologies could look in future. So in that sense, really appreciate, and I'm really glad that so many people has joined to talk about something which is so far ahead, but at the same time displaying the fact that you are interested in something like 60. So this was the very first question that when the committee was constituted in 2021, someone asked me, why do we need to talk about 60 then when India has not really rolled out its 5G? But now we are at a time when 5G technology is being rolled out. We start having this coverage in major cities, and it's really commendable on Indian government's part that they've actually constituted this committee sometime in 2021. And now we are looking at a solid 6G vision statement of the country, which also shows thought leadership from the part of government of India. So that is something to be proud of as an Indian. Um, Going on and talking about what my mission statement for today, we are looking at a 5G vision document from the government of India, but that's not it. It's a very brief um, uh, summary of the work that has been done by a large number of people over the last 2 years, which runs into reports and annexures over several hundred pages. So it is not, and if you really want to understand the vision statement and the background behind it, one would have to spend a lot of time reading and comprehending what goes into these specific committee report or task force reports that has been put out by the government. It is not really possible for me to summarize all those aspects in or the 20-25 minutes that I have. So I will be largely focusing on some of the major important points, which I think is relevant, and also looking at some of the key opportunities for the members of USIBC. And then, of course, like I said, this is a long-term project which will involve involvement of all of us on a continuing basis for over 5 to 6 years, or even a longer horizon of time. So, uh, starting with the introduction to Bharat's 60 mission. India as a country recognizes that 6G technology is going to be game changing in terms of the fact that it's not just 100 times the speed of 5G, in the sense that we will actually get speeds close to 1 Tbps, but also the fact that it could be game changing in terms of the ultra speed, highly reliable, low latency communication, which is possible, and which is possible to be utilized for a range of services. That range of services, if you look at it, the sort of speed and latency that we are talking about is truly when we will see the actual implementation of metaverse at a scale that we have not seen before, which involves haptic sensors, which will involve other sensors being involved, which will evoke sense of taste or sense of smell over the metaverse. And we are looking at that long-term realm or horizon when we look at a technology like 6G and what it could achieve. And it's not just in terms of consumer-facing technology that 6G has serious potentials in terms of unlocking the value of some of these technologies. It's also in healthcare. It's also in defense. It can be used for surveying. It can be used on AR, VR. It can be used for autonomous vehicles. We'll truly have the possibility of the tactile internet to unlock some of these technologies, including, for that matter, robotics, and most importantly, more than robotics, I would say cobotics, or for that matter, the next level of artificial intelligence, so to speak, the emergent intelligence, and using of massive twinning and other sort of technologies when it comes to the field of agriculture, when it comes to the field of manufacturing, and the scope of what 6G could unlock for the rest of the technology industry is just massive. And that's why it's really important that it's not just the telecom companies who should be engaging on this. It is actually the whole of the tech companies who should be engaged on any discussion with respect to 6G, because it's really relevant to the future outlook of your company and how we could utilize the digital infrastructure, the infrastructure of 6G to unlock the potential of various technologies that we are working on. So, like I said, like I mentioned earlier in my preface, the work started somewhere in 2021, where the government constituted a committee. The Department of Telecom constituted a committee, and it was a technology innovation group on 6G to develop a mission, roadmap, and action plan for 6G in India. And this current document that you're looking at uh, had six different task forces. They looked at six different aspects where what all could be the potential involvement of government, or how government could facilitate some of these activities, and where all should India as a country should focus on. While doing that, it also looked at several of the examples that we had in the past, from, for instance, the European Union's the Hexa Export Alliance, what government of Korea has been doing in this range in this regard, and prepared a very detailed report, which, like I mentioned, runs into several 600 pages, and the mission document summarizes what those are. So lastly, to focus on what the six pillars and the six task group specific committees focused on. One is actually about the multi-platform next generation network. Secondly is with respect to the research and development and the financing of the R&D that will happen into the 6G development. Third, aspects relating to how India can meaningfully contribute to discussions around standardization, which is of particular importance to a lot of USIBC members. Fourthly, talking about innovative solutions for the use of 6G. Some of them I mentioned earlier with respect to, whether it's telehealth or telepresence, or um, the use of tactile internet for various applications, including AR, VR, and the likes, including in terms of AR, use of AR, VR for instrumentation purposes. There are a lot of details that the report contains, which is an interesting read. Lastly, it also talks about the ecosystem for developing devices and systems for 6G, which also ties into the standardization aspects, which also ties into the newer uses and equipments and devices, and what should be the framework for that, with a vision of tying that into the Make in India mission of the Indian government. And lastly, the identification of spectrum, which is very key and an important point for a lot of members, because it also talks about potential ways in which spectrum can be unlocked, the need for delicensing of a lot of spectrum, the need for, in fact, even looking at uh, uh, looking at spectrum sharing, or for that matter, spectrum sharing which could happen in a seamless manner, etc. Some of the options and possibilities are being discussed. So, to my mind, while this looks like a long-term plan, this may also end up shaping some of the discussions that the government is currently having. For instance, if you look at the very basic aspects of spectrum sharing itself, it could impact some of the outcomes that we see in the current discussion that we are having with respect to the Indian Telecom Bill, or for that matter, the TRI consultation paper on allotment of spectrum for satellites. Because traditionally, this is just one example. There could be many further once we go through these documents in detail. One example is the fact that Indian Telecom Bill, for that matter, talks about, for the first time in the history of the telecom bills in India, talks about regulating spectrum which is in the light spectrum range, right? Earlier, there was always an exception in the Indian Telegraph Act and the likes, but the Indian Telecom Bills doesn't have that exception, which means that any sort of FOC technologies, which are long distance technologies, which currently is unregulated and not governed by any spectrum regulations, will be governed once the telecom bill comes in. Whereas the 60 statement, on the other hand, proposes a new, much more liberal regime when it comes to spectrum, and the importance of that for the development of 6G technologies, and where FOS technologies will play a huge role in terms of proliferation of 6G in India. So this is one example that we could probably use for even in our immediate discussions and policy discussions with the government of India. Similarly, I think the spectrum sharing point itself is of primary importance because there is also potential to relook at um, uh, concurrent and simultaneous use of spectrum by way of new spectrum sharing technologies instead of looking at the traditional model of just allotment of spectrum to one or few entities which cannot then be unlocked and used by other entities. So some of the key recommendations. So I think this runs in several lengths, but I've just compiled a few of them for the purpose of our discussion. One is specifically with respect to the spectrum, which we already spoke of, which includes opening up and delicensing for spectrum and sharing of spectrum, using of new technologies by which spectrum can be used. Because lastly, the committee recognizes the fact that we need more spectrum, and the demand they are saying at least is likely to be at least twice, if not thrice, the amount of spectrum that we currently have. So, given that situation, the committee looks at models including opening up a new spectrum and also looking at new alternative ways of spectrum sharing amongst the existing participants. It does not, and it does not go into the details of how it should be done. But like I said, these are all areas, or these are all thought process that could be used by us to, by companies to come up with innovative solutions, which will help the government find ways to tackle and solve this problem of limited spectrum for 5G 6G implementation. Similarly, there is also a lot of discussion in terms of the need for R&D, the research and development in the sector, and the need for investment in R&D into some of these areas, including in the semiconductor side of things, and the need for developing an ecosystem when it comes to devices in India, which is an area of opportunity for a lot of us. India also meaningfully wants to contribute to the standardization and the developments of standards and make adequate representations with various bodies and promote R&D from this perspective on standardization and developing in the standards, etc., which is a very important objective and recommendation which is coming out of the 60 mission statement. It obviously also talks about various new technologies apart from the LEO and the likes and the existing satellite technologies. It also talks about newer intelligent ways in which new technologies such as HSAP can be used. It also talks about the new telecom sharing technologies such as the cognitive RANs and integrated wireless and wired networks, and how those potentials and the need for R&D in that space and how that needs to be promoted, which also points to some of the existing discussions that we are having. The government is currently having. If you just recall, the TRI has just issued its digital communication infrastructure provider consultation process, right? Which is very much about liberalizing the current IP1 regime in India for ensuring that that could be used for cloud sharing and RAN sharing and various other new technologies coming up in the future. This is again another opportunity or a good vision statement or indication from the government that it is open to such refresh or relook at the existing regulatory regulations regarding the telecom sector. So of course, there is a very strong push on the need for innovative funding mechanisms to support the industry and the startups and the academia and national laboratories to undertake R&D as well, which also forms a very important theme of the document and the mission statement by the government. So it also talks about a couple of key challenges when doing this. One is, this is from the perspective of ensuring that there is adequate data security and privacy in satellite networks. It talks about balancing the potentially high carbon footprint of 6G enabled devices. So the second one is an interesting point. As you know, the whole green technology initiatives has been really the buzzword for the last couple of months, or even if not for the last 1 year. So it again reiterates the government's stand for pushing towards a carbon neutral or much more greener technologies when it comes to implementation of new technologies in India. This also is a tremendous opportunity for a lot of companies to invest, and government also talks about promoting R&D. There are various discussions in the document about various new technologies, about how new technologies can be used to better utilize spectrum, manage energy efficient utilization of spectrum and communication in the 6G technology, which the government believes is going to be one of the key pillars of 6G. So they, to the largest extent, realize the fact that, look, there are a large number of devices which are going to be online, much more than what 5G could do. In the 6G world, the number of devices, the number of people connected will be massive. Given that fact, how to, in the most efficient and optimal manner, achieve the ways of connectivity at the same time, retaining the green nature of the new technology that's been implemented, discussion throughout the paper. Of course, the third point is about ensuring the widespread access of 6G devices and affordable cost. It again ties back into the need for boosting local manufacturing, which is in line with government's Atmanirbhar and Make in India scheme. And that discussion again features in the whole of these discussion. In fact, that's one of the mandates given to the apex body and in fact the mission head to create policies in line with some of these existing policies of the government. How far it is achievable, what the government really intends by making those statements needs to be seen, because as you know, at a very early stage, more standardization and cooperation is what is needed, rather than focusing on just the domestic development of technology per se. But that's, I believe, is a longer conversation to have. So essentially, it talks about a couple of phases in which the implementation will be done. So 23 to 25 will actually be the initial phase for which there will be large amount of explorative ideas and proof of concepts will be done. And then in phase two, they plan to go on to the level of commercialization and implementation. And as you know, currently an Apex Council has been created with the Minister of Communication as the chair. And like I mentioned, there's also a mission head at the joint secretary level who will coordinate the mission and work with various bodies of the government itself, including the WPC and the TEC and the TDSI and various other bodies to come out with and guide the EPIC Council on how some of these missions and objectives could be achieved. Like I mentioned, it's a very long-term project that they have envisaged, and there are no clear uh, tasks per se identified other than broad objectives. But we expect that very soon there will be active consultation and involvement from academia, industry, then to firm up a much more solid action plan with respect to how this vision will be achieved, and that will be it'll be quite meaningful for all of us to engage in those conversations. So some of the potential opportunities, I think one is the fact that setting up of R&D facilities on spectrum, on various devices, on new technologies, on semiconductors. That's something that may receive an immediate boost from the government side. It also talks about the level of investments that various countries have made, and we expect similar sort of incentives also to be rolled out by the government at the right time to promote activities in this space. The second option, I spoke about the liberalization of spectrum bands and allotment is another discussion which is an opportunity for us. In fact, that is probably an immediate opportunity for many of us, which need not necessarily tie into the whole 6G equation, but something which is even before, both at an R&D space and also for a commercial implementation space. Um, the other important thing to talk about while talking about the spectrum, the committee again talks about the V band and the E band, and the fact that how some of those spectrum could be utilized for 6G. As you know, E band was conditionally liberalized just for telcos for very limited purposes for last mile, but it's not yet opened up for the rest of the companies. V band is not really fully opened up. So these are all conversations that we could all have with the government along the lines of this mission. And this mission really gives an indication that government could be open to discussing some of these aspects. Of course, another aspect that comes very clearly is the fact that government's focus on autonomous driving vehicles and vehicle-to-vehicle communication, and how it could be used with the backbone of technology like 6G. And there is also talk about supporting some of the R&D efforts along these lines, use of and promotion of telehealth related R&D and mixed reality experiences, etc., etc. The vision statement provides a lot of promises in terms of areas where one could potentially work on a 6G related mission, not just particularly on the development of 6G itself, but also the allied technologies that could use 6G itself. Similarly, it also talks about the opportunity of new creation of new services emerging from convergence of terrestrial and satellite, broadband broadcasting, remote sensing, captive network, etc. It talks about in future the ways in which many of these technologies and existing modes of communication with work with each other to deliver high bandwidth, low latency internet, where all these networks could work in a seamless manner, which also I believe is a great opportunity in a connected world where we are all leading to a connected world with a large number of devices. It's a huge opportunity for all of us to look forward to. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Happy to hear the views of the others or take any specific questions if you have. Thank you very much. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you so much, Nikhil, for clearly laying out the opportunities, challenges, and the timeline of the 6G initiative. Before sort of moving on to the audience questions, I would like to sort of turn to some of our experts in the telecom space. May I ask our digital economy co-chair, Amit Kushwaha, who's the Director of Regulatory Affairs APAC at AT&T. Amit, if you can sort of come on screen and share your thoughts about the vision document. And you've been a veteran in this space for such a long time. Want to understand from you as to how does the vision document sort of match up with the ground realities, and what are some of the learnings of the 5G implementation that can be adopted in the planning of development of 6G technologies? Over to you, Amit.
Thanks, Aditya, and let me first compliment Nitin for a very well summarized 6G vision document. I think it has dealt with the gamut of issues, and to bring that into say 5 or 10 slides, I think it's a very difficult task, but he has very well been able to do it. My thoughts are very concise in the sense that this is indeed a thought leadership at this point of a time. The government has taken concrete steps in terms of bringing together academia, startup, industry, vendors towards a common goal. And I believe a vision document with this encompasses all the different segments altogether. So I think this is overall a comprehensive document. The need is how it progresses further. I think the success of this document lies majorly in how we are able to take this forward. If being the second largest telecom network, it is indeed a sincere attempt to be self-reliant as well as to be able to export the technology. I think this was an attempt for 5G, but I think this time the attempt is much more sincere in terms of defining the contours of what we need to do. They have defined the 6 segments, which are the spectrum, devices, standardization, innovative solutions, multi-platform, NGN, and the R&D finance. I think I will look towards R&D finance as one of the major steps, because this is where focus will lie, how they plan to spend it. Because if they are able to do this correctly, I think there is no doubt that we will be able to do it. It is also one of the things that we should look at, that this time, if we are coming on to the standardization phase first, then we are able to have a requirement built into the standards from a very nascent stage, which becomes difficult after the standards are formed, which we see with 5G when the TSDSI was actually doing some work. So I think this will help us in having those standards defined, having IPRs. I think that all is very good. From a timing perspective, I don't see it. It's very timely, because considering even the report, already countries like US, Europe, South Korea, Japan China and ITU are already working on it. So it's a good time to be on board and be able to contribute. So overall, I think I see that it's a good focus towards redevelopment, good focus towards actually taking a leap towards 6G. And I think it's timely because any standards take at least 7 to 10 years to come into a practical scenario, and 5G's mandate is still in the development phase, wherein the standalone networks are still coming up. So I think that's a very timely move. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit, for that summary. I'd like to open the floor to our members. If you'd like to offer some thoughts, or if you have any questions to Nikhil, to Amit, we'd be happy to answer that.
Hey, hi Aditya. This is Priya here.
Hi, Priya.
Hi. First of all, let me congratulate Nikhil for a very, very good presentation. Very insightful, especially talking about India's, vision and mission to be self-reliant in emerging technology space, becoming a tech leader. I think it's really overwhelming and very, very encouraging as a proud Indian. And to me, I think what really lies at the heart of the whole discussion is the fact that the connectivity plays a very important role in underpinning so many other services and applications, as Nikhil mentioned in his presentation. And speaking from a Verizon perspective, we have been at the forefront of being really a thought leader, especially in line with our presence in the US, where we were the first to deploy 5G, commercial 5G in the US. I just had a few observations. Maybe I'm being a bit skeptical, although the 5G vision, the 6G vision document really looks very promising, with the potential of new and emerging services being underpinned by it. Nikhil's last slide spoke about some of the new service model emerging with the convergence of multi-access technologies. For example, captive networks was mentioned as one of the potential scenarios. And I do recall that last year, the government had come up with captive private network non-private guidelines. This was pursuant to a TRI recommendation as well. The license guidelines were issued, and there were some media reports indicating that, in fact, some of the large system integrators had kind of started applying for the spectrum. I mean, this is all media, but we did see that there was a DOT document which was talking about license guidelines and what's the scoping of that. I'd be curious to know from Nikhil, where do we stand on that? Because I think in line with our presence in the B2B space, I would be interested to know more about not only the policy roadmap and maybe the timeline that the DOT is looking at, because I think that's one of the interesting use case that potentially the enterprises would be looking at. So any thoughts on that, Nikhil?
So Priya, so in fact, I've done a fair bit of work leading to the whole liberalization of captive view. So currently it is live, and in fact, if my information, if my memory is correct, it's been granted to one or two enterprise groups as well. It's based on the fact that you can get captive spectrum, and you can use that captive spectrum for purely internal use, which could be in airports, which could be in ports, which could be in hotels or hospitals or large stadiums, could be used for delivering multimedia content. So purely it's like an internal use per se. So the way that we were, so in fact, one of the uses for this actually largely is in the specialized services, where you can control the network to the extent possible and do the slicing and dicing and create your own different logical partitioning and have different sort of latencies applied for specific applications within. So that's currently available to companies. I believe it's also been granted as well, right? I can check up and get back to you on the latest status of it, but that's the guideline which has also been issued by the DOT, if I'm not wrong, right? So that opportunity still stands. But right. I'll tell you, there was some recent report on this, which I just need to go back and check, because I remember seeing a couple of weeks back that there was some discussion on how some of these potential use cases of captive. I just need to check back and let you know. We can connect offline.
Right, sure. Thanks for that, Nikhil. Because I do recall that the DOT was undertaking a market study to assess the potential demand for these kind of applications. And initially, there was a discussion whether it will be an operator-led model or it will be a direct assignment. So I think we don't really have much clarity on it. But as you say, that there may be already a case for directly enterprises being allocated spectrum by the DOT instead of going through the operator. So that's an interesting space. As
it contemplates two models. It
right.
contemplates two models. In fact, when we went to the in fact, for that matter, I was part of a representation where industry body went to the DOT and asked for this to be specifically liberalized, and so in fact there was a lot of demand for captive use per se in India. I know for that for a fact.
Yeah, I think this is in line with what is really emerging in other parts of Asia Pacific, like in
Exactly.
Australia or Japan or Germany for that matter. Yeah.
There are captive allowances there as well. But the only sad part about it is the fact that we are again focusing on few aspects of the access spectrum, whereas there could be other captive networks which could be created by using several other spectrums which are available and freely liberalized elsewhere in the world, but we still haven't done it, right? I think V band is probably the case in point.
Right. So thanks for that, Nikhil. Interesting space to watch out, definitely.
And thank you, Priya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. One of the interesting aspects, Nikhil, of just 6G communication is the terahertz communication angle, right? So it will require a serious sort of technological jump. So what sort of R&D capacity or technological capacity that needs to be built up, or what needs to be done for us to sort of meet the objectives of this vision statement?
So look, I mean, I'm completely clueless about that answer per se because I'm not the technical guy, right? But I don't know if Amit or someone else in the team can answer that question.
Aditya, I really missed that question, so you will have to repeat it for me.
Amit, the question is on terahertz communication and the kind of technological jump that might be required to be able to make this happen. So, what sort of skilling or talent requirement or R&D capacity that needs to be built up to meet the objectives of the vision statement?
So I think there are few things. While I may try to explain it, I will not be a fully capable person, but let me try explaining it in a very layman language. So as we go up higher in the frequency, the propagation characteristics of the waves are such that the amount of coverage gets limited. So when we're talking about terahertz, the kind of bandwidth that we require will be in a very high band. So in the when we are at this point, we are talking about gigahertz that will be in a terahertz range, and at that point, the propagation characteristics very very limited. So when we are talking about say 28 gigahertz spectrum, which is used for 5G, the coverage is hardly limited to 500 meters or that kind of thing. So when you're talking about terahertz, you can limit it to that point. So the concept is that when you are using it, the coverage will be limited, and then even your mobile devices will act like a network. So they will be receiving the signal and they will also be radiating that signal. So you won't be requiring an exact base station to be able to do that kind of a communication. And at the same time, since the bandwidth is more, you will be able to get more output and more bandwidth out of it. So this is a kind of a futuristic concept wherein you don't have a base station per se, but the mobile devices themselves are acting as a base station for you. And that is how I think the things get different, because acting as a base station requires you to transmit, the battery requirements increase, I think the gamut of issues get changed. So that is why terahertz or terahertz communication will be entirely different from what we are seeing as of now. So I think that's what I can gauge, and rest I think there are various technical people who can explain it maybe much better than me. Thank you.
Thanks, Amit. That's very clear. Thank you. Samir, over to you. You have a question?
Yes. Hi, Nikhil. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. So my question is regarding how the current regulations that we are bringing into, let's say, technologies like 5G and SATCOM, satellite spectrum sharing, what are the lessons that we can basically take out in terms of India's 5G evolution and translate that into 6G? Because 6G kind of looks like an incremental change in terms of the number of devices that can be connected. So do you have anything to share on this?
I think it's a loaded question, and first of all, thank you for your compliment on the presentation, and also like Amit sir also earlier said, right? I actually was thinking about what not to say from the report rather than what to say, because it's really vast, right? So I'm sure there are many things which I have missed or not addressed. So I urge you to all go through it during your free time. Now, with respect to the learnings per se, I think this is also something that Amitji also shared. I can say that, look, one aspect is just the latency, just the number of devices and the speed may not really be it when it comes to aspects relating to 6G, because one, it's a technology which is being developed right now. And this was a question I remember uh, being posed in sometime in 2016 when we were talking about 5G. And we didn't have the entire, we couldn't fully understand what 5G really stands and how some of these changes will actually be implemented. So I can think of few things. So one is by taking the example of how 5G implementation happened. So as you know, while the country is going through 5G implementation, there are few things in the regulation which are actually throttling the development of 5G technology or a deployment of 5G technology. One is the fact that some of our laws insist on equipment ownership when it comes to wireless telegraph. It relies on the fact that you need to have a possession, which restricts some of the implementation of new age technologies, which utilizes cloud, which utilize sharing. There are no, even when it comes to SATCOM itself, the questions of, does everyone who need to use SATCOM or implement SATCOM need to actually implement very expensive, capex heavy gateways for operation? Can't that be sharing? So there are many things that has come up from a 5G perspective, which I think now we have enough 7 years to actually go and tackle. And while more details about the technology is coming out, I'm sure new problems will also come up per se. And for that matter, for all 7 years, we don't know where global warming will be. We don't know where climate change will be. We don't know whether we'll be thinking about new aspects relating to new green technology that we have not ever thought of before, right? So I think it's sort of like a loaded question in that sense, but I'm sure that couple of years down the line, maybe 2 to 3 years down the line, we'll start having some more clarity about where exactly the 6G technology is how it is going. And I'm 100% sure from all my experience in working from edge technology itself, that each technology has posed its own challenges. I'm sure 6G also will do.
Thank you for that response, Nikhil.
Great. Thanks, Nikhil. We have a question from Ujjwal Kumar from Kutch.
Thank you, Aditya. The minister has said that India has around more than 100 patents with respect to 6G. Do you have any idea about which areas these patents are and who are the patent holders type?
I don't know. The report also at the same time says that we have very minimal patents in terms of communication technology, right? And the need for sort of boosting that is also pointed out in the report, but I'm not specifically looked into that aspect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Please feel free to raise your hands or drop the question in the chat box. Meanwhile, Nikhil, I had a question to pose. As Amit mentioned, that it's still in the thought leadership phase, and the next 2 years, the government is also looking at exploring ideas and so on. So, are there any mechanisms that are in place for interested stakeholders to engage with the government folks? You mentioned the Apex Council. I mean, what's the sort of structure and what is the sort of mechanism through which one can engage with the government on this 6G vision, or is consultations way down the line?
So I think I don't think there is a formal structure in place yet, because we are also at the initial stage per se, right? So I don't think there is a formal structure, but I don't think that should stop us from trying to actively engage through the minister or through the joint secretary, to ensure that we are in line, and whatever we have to say are heard. And I believe that the consultation process will actually will start pretty soon. Of course, like I said, it's a thought leadership piece. It's a long-term initiative, so it'll they will obviously prioritize other things, including aspects relating to telecom bill, and probably even looking at some of restructuring of the licensing regime, etc. Over 6G. So we can start engaging right from the beginning itself, in an informal manner. And when we do that, I think when we engage on aspects relating to telecom bill and new licensing framework that the government will probably put out in the next year or so, we should bake into aspects relating to the 6G vision into our comments. That's probably a good, meaningful way to start engaging with the government. Like I said, there are many pieces like sharing of equipment and various other things which is come from the old telecom stack hangover period, which are still existing in our regulations. We can start working with sort of undoing some of those.
Thank you. We have 3 questions now. Shailendra, would I request you to come on screen and ask a question?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So thanks a lot. This was a wonderful presentation. So my question is that, as you rightly said, that during a presentation there are a lot of different countries who have already started working on 6G. For example, Hexa's vision. NextG Alliance has its own vision, which is almost 2 to 3 years ahead of us, if you see from a vision point of view. Now, what do we need to do, or what is government planning, in your opinion, to bridge that gap, which we are already lagging by 2 to 3 years? And what really they are planning to do better and faster, so that we can really achieve the leadership in the 6G by 2028 or 2030.
So it's I think I would say that the international the sort of developments and sort of alliances that we have seen abroad, most of these companies are also present in India. So I think the government could very well learn from the representations that the industry bodies can make, and ensure that our sort of lag is actually to a large extent overtaken, right, by that period of time. I can only hope. I cannot really say with certainty that that's something that the government will do. And look, I truly believe that, look, there are some countries which are, for instance, Korea for that matter, very tech advanced. They're ahead in when it comes to tech, but their scale is very different. They don't have the problems of a scale. So if you just look at it, 2 years of a delay is not much of a delay, because we still have 7 years to plan. We sometimes can even look at what the work that they've done so far, and also put in perspective of the scale and the problems of scale that this country will pose, right? And use that as an advantage. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shailendra. Nikhil, we have 2 questions in the chat. Ravi Ramamurthy asks, which organizations are expected to lead 6G development? Government? Any idea about government R&D centers or Indian companies? And then we have another question from Junaid, who asked, do you think India will chart out a distinct path for 6G when compared with other countries?
So I'll ask Junaid questions first. I think, look, it's very difficult for such a standard technology to completely chart out a distinct path per se. It needs to be harmonized to a large extent with what the rest of the world is doing. We can be a thought leader and provide guidance to the world because look, I don't know how much many of you may know this already, but several of the telecom stacks that's implemented in India because of the scale, we have achieved certain level of optimal efficiency has been implemented in several European countries across the globe, right? So certain models, including certain outsourcing models in the telecom, actually developed in India and then got rolled out in the rest of the world. So in that sense, it needs to be harmonized with the rest of what the rest of the world is doing. So it may not entirely be a distinct path. It will be a harmonized path. Is my opinion. Secondly, with respect to the R&D, I think it will happen from in a coordinated manner with both the private sector and the public sector. With respect to the private sector per se, I can see, I know some of my clients are here and the sort of R&D related issues that they have faced when it comes to R&D in telecom, doing test beds in telecom, using spectrum for experimental licensing, etc. As you know, some of them have been liberalized and things have gotten slightly better over the years. We should all push for it. And then which if that happens, then which means that we will actually see more of private R&D developing. But the intent statement is fairly clear that it's going to be promoting R&D in both private sector and government initiatives.
Thanks, Nikhil. Samir?
So Nikhil, one final question from my so given 6G has several applications across deep tech related areas, ranging from AR to metaverse, so on and so forth.
Voice is slightly muffled. Can you just come again?
I was basically saying, given 6G has a lot of applications across deep technology related areas like AR, metaverse, so on and so forth, do you think regulation when it comes to 6G like technologies should be considered from a various use case scenario point of view and looked at from a very holistic perspective rather than looking at it at isolation? I think you have briefly touched upon this during your presentation, but can you throw some light on this? Like, should it be holistic rather than just looking at it as an individual technology as such?
So is it on regulation of 6G or is it on regulation of new technologies that use 6G as a backbone?
Yeah, basically new technologies that are using 6G as a backbone as such. So should it be done?
I believe that's an entirely different ambit altogether from the 6G regulation, right? I mean, I'll for instance, I think let's look at something like metaverse, right? So largely metaverse is nothing but internet on steroids, right? It's data collection on steroids, right? You can walk into a hotel room before you book the hotel room and even get the sense of the smell of the hotel room, right? Which means that when you walk into that room in person, there should be a sensor in that room to actually tell you that, look, this is exactly the sense that I had promised, so that there's no mis-selling, right? So many of the problems that we actually see on the internet is going to be on steroids and let's say a technology like Meta, right? So I think most of these problems lead to a lot of new sorts of data collection, new use of sensor technologies, new technologies being used, the liability of the various players involved in, let's say, you use a surgery, you're conducting a surgery using a haptic technology, right? But it's a matter of depending on the census and how it works, a person's life and death depends on it, right? There are these sort of questions that come up, but like I said, all these problems of internet will be on steroids when, let's say, Meta comes, right? Metaverse comes. So I believe that that's a standalone question that needs to be addressed at a different level altogether and completely alienated and separated from 6G. 6G should be dealt with as a backbone technologies, just like any other digital infrastructure, just like the way telecom regulations are being carried out. The content on that network or the services on that network needs to be regulated if there is a need to regulate, if there is a regulatory harm that's being caused, or if there is a real world harm that's being caused due to implementation of the technology. So I think that should be two different approaches that we should be taking.
Thank you for that response, Nikhil. Over to you, Aditya.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks, Nikhil. We have about 5 minutes to go. Any questions from our members? Please feel free to raise your hand. We have one question in the chat box. Has the issue of network slicing in terms of net neutrality breach 5G been settled, or such net neutrality can arise with respect to 6G?
So I think it's a question of, so I think we need to understand the concept of network neutrality in a bit more of a refined manner to actually even conclude with certainty that um, a network net neutrality as a concept will be breached using 5G itself, right? So it's a question of, so I think there is a need to relook at the concept of net neutrality itself, which is something that a lot of us has been talking about when India was talking about net neutrality, that it is not entirely forward looking. There are two aspects relating to net neutrality. One is with respect to tariffs, which is a different issue altogether. Then second is an issue with respect to prioritization or throttling of a particular content, depending on the fact that that content is of a certain nature. But let's say that the person who is actually emanating or originating that content and the person is receiving that content, saying that, look, I want a certain treatment of that content to have a certain level of latency so that I can perform a surgery on a person from remotely, right? Without necessarily affecting the quality of the rest of the messages that go through the network. I am someone who believes that it should not be stopped, right? So now the question is, there are traffic prioritization techniques, right? Which, in fact, the TRI has also looked into it and come out with its own recommendations on it. These are questions that is not really settled in the truest of the sense when it comes to 5G. It's arguable whether that's a violation of net neutrality if no content is blocked, no content is suppressed, no content is being throttled, right? And if you just look at the larger public good itself, it is serving a public good. Now, this is a case for surgery, but whether you are okay for it to be on an AR/VR device, on your Oculus device, it's a different question altogether. I personally believe it shouldn't. If somebody is ready to pay for it, somebody is ready to give for it, provided my other content is not affected, it should be okay. And now go and take a look at your wireless mesh network. Ultimately, my wireless mesh network is configured for the best streaming experience for me. That's why you can see me seamlessly. So there is some local bandwidth adjustment piece happening so that we can see each other very clearly, right? So it is happening at a local level anyways. Now it's only a question of the regulator also taking note of it. And I personally haven't seen any enforcement of some of these even at a slicing level for 5G so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. So can we say that in terms of the use cases, say for example, surgery, and say for example, video streaming, for surgery there will be no distinction between two service providers of surgery. But there can be distinction between, say, surgery type of use cases and just streaming a video use cases. So that will, the second case, it will not breach the net neutrality.
So look, I mean, the government is supposed to come out with specific use case for specialized network as an exemption. If my memory is correct, they haven't come out, right? So it's even right now it's a question of question of real enforcement and the government notifying those specific cases. So as of now, the government is not notified that as a allowable use case. But what I'm saying is that as a concept, prioritization of a certain content could still be argued as being against net neutrality, except for specific use cases. And even right now, my understanding is that traffic optimization techniques at different levels happens, right? And that often happens for the benefit of the user itself, right? It's you can deliver a certain message to a user much more efficiently and faster than going through the same route as taking it through the video streams or the video content, right? Those sort of optimization technologies have been in place for quite some time. And I believe that's in use in India as well, right? So I don't believe the government has necessarily said that it should not be used at all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. We're dot on time. This has been an excellent session. I'd like to thank you for such a wonderful presentation, your time, and for your insights. I think everyone in our membership would really appreciate the insights that you've offered. I'd also like to thank Amit, our digital economy co-chair, for sharing his thoughts on the vision document as well. We will make the slides available for any member who'd like to access them. I hope that's okay, Nikhil, your end.
Yeah, sure.
And I want to thank Trilegal for supporting USIBC on a quarterly basis. In a few months' time, we'll come up with another webinar. Hopefully, the conversation around 6G would evolve in such a manner that we would be able to talk about it in more specific and more detail. With that, I'd like to thank all our members for joining in for this webinar. Please note that this webinar is recorded, and we will post this on YouTube and share it with everybody. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone. It was good fun speaking to all of you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a nice day.